always find yourself a friend. Lay down your defenses and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm really excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And it's in that effort that I'm attempting to look through my own spiritual heritage to the Christian scriptures and specifically the teachings of Jesus to try to find those teachings that I think are applicable to all people, all humans, regardless of our particular faith or regardless of our differences of our political opinions or our lifestyles. I truly believe that there are beautiful and applicable teachings in these scriptures that are 2,000 years old that are applicable here and now in our modern age. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We're in actually the book of Matthew is what we're working through right now. We're in Matthew chapter 23. We're looking at verses 23 and 24 today. And starting with verse 23. And he who swears by heaven, well, actually, that's 22. Let's do 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. So we're currently in one of my sort of favorite sections of the account of Jesus, largely because it's this moment that we get to see a Jesus that's different from everything else that's portrayed to us. We get this Jesus who previously or throughout the rest of the account, who's, the servant of other people, who's taking care of the sick and taking care of the needy, and seems sort of passive, doesn't really go on the offense, isn't really vocal, and doesn't seem like the kind of person that can really, get out there and make a statement that's strong. I mean, obviously he did that, but this particular section of the scripture is where he really sinks in. And he's in the temple right now. And so when he's doing this, it is highly controversial, highly offensive, incredibly uncomfortable, probably for the people, all the people in the temple. So right now we're in the temple in this account. This is when Jesus finally goes to Jerusalem. This is towards the end of the story of Jesus. He's going to be handed over to the religious leaders here very soon to be, tortured and then put to death. Right now, he's come to Jerusalem during Passover, and which is like one of the more important holidays for Jewish individuals, even today. And back then, hundreds of thousands of Jewish pilgrims would have come from all over the region to come to Jerusalem, to this temple, which is this huge, massive building with all of the priests and the teachers and the Pharisees. Their sort of supreme court and their governing body are here, as well as their really chief church, or pope, if you will, for lack of a better term. But this is where they all come to do all the religious aspects, to pay their dues, to take care of, things that they have, penalties that they've got to pay, offerings that they've got to make, their taxes, all of these things they'll do on this weekend. So when Jesus comes here and is disrupting everything, right at the beginning of this section, a few studies ago, we saw him throwing the money changers and the vendors and merchants' tables over and shooing them and pushing them quite violently out of the temple, and claiming that this is not supposed to be a den of thieves, that it's supposed to be a place where people get help. And now we've got these 8 different woes or sort of attacks, if you will, of Jesus on the religious leadership. And we've seen a couple of them already. This one today sits really close to my heart and was really impactful in helping change my way of thinking as a person of faith. And especially coming from a more conservative background, it really helped break the mold for me and make me reach outside of my comfort zone and assumptions. So let's walk through this passage. I just want to go verse by verse quickly. There's only 2 verses, and that way we can understand what the language actually means and why he uses particular words when he's rebuking these Pharisees. So first, woe to you, Pharisees and teachers of the law, you hypocrites, which is essentially we've talked about in the last few studies, but for those of you who are just attending this study for the first time, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are their highest priests. They're popes, they're cardinals, they're bishops. Also, they're their representatives, the Sanhedrin, the council, they're political representatives. So like our state Congress people, like our state house, but actually in this case, it's going to be the US government. It would be the comparable analogy. And the Supreme Court's also here. This is where all of the major cases that require substantial thought come before the Sanhedrin. And in fact, that's where Jesus is going to go before, is this governing council. So when Jesus calls them hypocrites, it means exactly the same thing that it does today. In fact, it's the exact same word with a minor twist in it. It's hypokrites in the Greek back then 2,000 years ago, but we say hypocrites. But essentially it means, right, somebody doing something and saying something and representing themselves in one way, and then behind the scenes doing it completely differently and actually not being the person that they claim to be or having the motives that they claim to have. The term really means actors. It's a derogatory way of saying somebody is putting on a performance. In other words, they're lying, in essence. And so when he says this to the religious leaders, it's really quite offensive. It would be just as horribly offensive as if somebody walked into the state assembly or into the Pope's room or into the Supreme Court and called them all blind guides and a den of vipers. So it's pretty controversial at this time. And I wanted to bring that out because I think Jesus often gets this sort of passive, love-bound, peace, beatniky, hippie kind of a thing. And that's not to say that he didn't have those parts of him, but he also was somebody who stood up to authority and made it clear what he believed the good intentions and the good points of our society should be. So then he says in the next verse, you give 1/10 of your spices, dill, cumin, and mint is the other one that's listed. And then yet you neglect fairness, kindness, and commitment. So what's he talking about here? Part of the requirements of being a good person in this society meant that you had to give a portion of your income and a portion of your proceeds or growth. If you were a farmer, it meant 10% of your crop would be given to the temple. The idea being that this is supposed to be used obviously to take care of the needs of feeding the priests, but also for supplying for the poor people. This was supposed to be where all the overflow went to the temple so that it could go back out to the people who needed them. Right, that makes sense. Unfortunately, that's not what was happening at this time. In fact, all of that money was just stopping right there at the government level, was stopping right at the Sanhedrin. And the Pharisees weren't redistributing that wealth. It went directly to them. And that's one of the major platforms that Jesus is trying to point out. In this specific instance, he lists spices, which I think is hysterical, because when he's comparing them to what they're supposed to be doing, he's saying, look, okay, you guys are great at being perfectly pure, right? You have crossed all your T's and dotted all your I's when it comes to all these little tiny laws that you have to fulfill. You keep excellent accounts of your perfection when it comes to these laws, in so much as even your dill collection. And people would grow their own spices oftentimes, and sometimes they would buy from others, but giving a tenth of the spices meant it was something that was a trifle, like nothing significant. It was showing that they were being so specifically perfect in fulfilling the law that they even gave a section of their spices, which weren't really needed. And then he says, so you do all this, but you have neglected justice, or fairness would be a word for that. You've neglected mercy. Another word would be kindness for that. You've neglected faith or faithfulness, or what we would call commitment. Commitment to people who need you. Commitment to your obligations as a priest and to help others and to help society. And then he goes on to say that they should have, that's great that you're doing the deal. Go ahead and do that. That's not bad. But do the good things. These are like the basics. You can't just focus on these little things and neglect these massive, fundamental aspects of how society is supposed to work. And then he calls them blind guides and gives us one more analogy. Blind guides meaning literally guides who are supposed to be leading people but can't see where they're supposed to go. And then he gives us this analogy, one that I adore because it really broke my mold considerably. And he says, you strain out a gnat, but you swallow a camel. A gnat, of course, is like that. Those little tiny insects that fly around. They're smaller than like a mosquito even. They're like a fruit fly would be essentially the same kind of thing. But the whole point is it is the smallest possible insect. And this insect doesn't do anything. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's not going to kill you if you swallow it. It's not going to hurt anybody or cause any death. But they are so bent on purity that they're willing to spend all that time getting rid of a tiny little gnat. All the while, they're swallowing a camel. They're swallowing something that is a massive, horrific, terrible thing. And I think Jesus is trying to put in perspective for them, look, all of this pomp and circumstance that you've made out of this religion, all of this hierarchy and rules and the way to dress, the way to speak, the way to pray, the way to be a good person, all of these things are not important. These are gnats that you're trying to pull out of a soup, which isn't really going to kill anybody. We're talking about an ancient society here also, right? A gnat in somebody's soup is not going to be a big deal. Today, maybe it's a little bit more. We're a little bit more protected from all of that. But back in the day, you're not going to throw out a bowl of soup because it's got a gnat in it. You would just eat it because, quite frankly, you're probably eating a whole bunch of other stuff that isn't amazing or delicious. So now, these Pharisees have missed the whole point. And that's what Jesus is trying to say. And this is what I love about this particular passage and why I think it's critically important today. Today, we have the exact same thing. And this is also my story and my failure as a person, as a human being, I would say even. I grew up in a very conservative, very purity-driven religion or expression of Christianity. It was called Pentecostals or holiness movement. Essentially, it was all about sanctifying ourselves was the term, but it meant doing everything possible to make ourselves as perfect and pure for God here on this earth, because that was our goal. And so that meant, no drinking, no smoking. The saying was, don't drink, smoke, or chew, or dance with girls or guys that do. That was their focus. And the whole joke was, the reason why we don't let kids dance together is it, it might lead to promiscuity or something like that. And it's such a ridiculous notion, but that's where we were at, in a place of wanting to be separate from all of the bad things in life. And that's not a bad thing in and of itself, trying to be better or trying to be a better person and try to weed out things that are going to inhibit us from being able to accomplish what we want. I don't drink as much myself personally, not that I drink, but I don't see it as I used to. It used to be if I even had a sip of alcohol, then that meant that I basically should go ahead and drink the whole bottle because I had sinned or had done something so bad that it warranted me just losing complete abandon. All the while, and this is where I feel it's completely relevant today, our spiritual leaders are doing the same thing. But their list of purity is having a nice car, is having a nice house, is having Botox, is having pearly white teeth, is, I'll say being sexually pure, allegedly, not drinking, not smoking. These are the kinds of things, being financially well off. Those are the things that have become important in the church. They are the signs of what a good person looks like, in so much that they will honor people by giving them the front row seats in their churches, I kid you not, because they give more money, and leaving the poor widow in the back because she doesn't give much. That's not what their founder meant, and it's not what their founder wanted, which is frustrating to me. And I know that it was my error as well. And when I saw this, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel, it clicked for me along the same lines of his that he desires mercy, not sacrifice. The idea is, as human beings, it is more important for us to spend the time fixing the basic foundations and focusing on that and talking about it and demanding it of our leadership, especially. Justice, fairness, not just for the wealthy, not just for the powerful, but for every person. Every person gets justice. Kindness is the second one. How many very vocal ministers out there lately have you heard that have been saying good things about other people, their enemies especially? And yet the founder of my particular faith background told us that the whole ideal is to love our neighbors and to say and speak well of other people. As human beings, this is a benefit to us. It doesn't mean that we ignore bad people or that we ignore them doing things that are wrong, but it means that we don't slander individuals, that we try to bring somebody into a place of understanding instead of just casting them aside because they disagree with us. In the church and in our religious communities, it means that we've got to get our Prada shoes dirty. It means that being kind to homeless people means feeding them, and it means being around individuals who haven't bathed in a while. It is complicated being kind. It is difficult to be committed. It means giving up some of our privilege to be fair. These are the things that lend to a society that can be happy for all, that can promote peace. Because when we don't do these things as human beings, when we don't promote fairness and we give favor and privilege to those who are wealthy because they can afford more lawyers, or we are unkind to individual by yelling at them, by saying horrible things about them, when we're not committed to them by leaving them to themselves and not helping them in their time of need, we create opportunity for people to have resentment and eventually to lead to violence, because people can only suffer for so long. I worry a bit that currently we are neglecting our poor. We're neglecting our homeless. We're neglecting even the middle income these days. It's very difficult to survive even in America, to survive as basically two incomes in a household. We have fees and penalties in our laws that are oppressive and cause suffering in our people. These are things that we can talk about. I appreciate you joining me today. I do like this section that we're going through right now, talking about the leaders and these rebukes, because I feel like there's a lot of our own leadership that we need to think about, and we need to think about what we need to say and what we need to do to help change the status quo, to help change what's out there, to be fair to other people, to be kind to those that we can be kind to be committed to those that we commit to. If you have thoughts or reflections or comments, I would absolutely love it if you could put them in the comments below the video, because it's helpful for me. It's helpful for other people to see your particular and unique perspective. There's no one in the universe who has the perspective that you do. You're the only one who can think the way that you do, and that's a valuable asset, and I appreciate it. So until tomorrow, when we continue talking yet again, another rebuke to the leaders. There's only a few more left. Until then, live at noon, I want to make sure that you know that I love you. This is the American Sign Language sign for I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It is the only love that we control in this life. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.